So let's look at a different kind of array structure, associative arrays. I'm going to just briefly recap indexed arrays just to remind you of the way that they work, and then you'll see the close connection there are between indexed arrays and associative arrays. So here's an indexed array, and we've done this before. We used this particular example before as well. So instead of having just one value inside a variable, what arrays enable us to do is to have many values inside a variable. So for example, here is an array structure called colours, and what colours has is 4 values inside it, red, green, blue and yellow. And if we want to access each of the individual subparts, each of the individual cells of the colours variable, then the way that we do that is to use the name of the variable, which in this instance is colours, and then in square brackets we place the cell we're particularly interested in. So if we want to find out what's inside box number 1, we go colours square brackets 1, and what that will do is that will give us the value green. If we want to set a value, well, we use the same notation. We do something like this. We go colours, and then in square brackets we put the index, the particular cell we're interested in, so for example 2, and here we're going to set it to be a value. We're going to say colours 2 is purple, and it does that just like that. Now remember that because we're dealing with a string, what kind of information is inside the box, that's going to be a series of characters, so we have to wrap it up in double quotes just like that. And if we want to set up an indexed array, well, if you know the values in advance, you can simply do this. This is very straightforward in PHP. You just kind of go colours 0 is red, colours 1 green, colours 2 purple, just like that. If you know all the values in advance, you can use the array reserve word, and in brackets you can just wrap them up in quotes, and it creates that structure. And by default, if you use this, the index starts from 0. Now we've done all that before. If you want to add an item onto the end, you can use an empty square brackets operator like that, and what that does is that just sticks something on the end. Now that's called an indexed array, and because we have an index which is just a number across the top, and all programming languages have indexed arrays, something that look like that. PHP offers this thing though that's called an associative array, and the way that associative arrays are different to indexed arrays is instead of using a number to gain access to the cell, we have a word, a label. So let's have a look at an actual example. So let's imagine we have this thing here. This is an indexed array of television programs. So this is an indexed array, it's got numbers across the top. What would it look like if it was an associative array? Well, we have labels to index the cells. So this is an associative array. Instead of having numbers, we've got words, and we've got names of particular people, Dan, Barry, Phil and Walter, just like that. So how do we actually gain access to the contents of one of these individual cells? Well, this structure is called favTV. And so what we do, and it looks sort of similar to what we had before, we're going to use square brackets. We go favTV, and then we have square brackets, but of course here we can't just write a number down, we actually have to write down the label. And because this is a string, we're going to wrap it up in quotes. So you use that square bracket and quotes notation that we've seen before. And what that will do is that would actually print out the value of Lovecraft Country like that. If we did favTV Dan, that would print out Match of the Day, just like that. If we want to set a value, then what we do is we use that notation, but we use an equal sign and we give it a value. So we could go favTV Walter is Daily Show, like that, and that will transform the contents of the cell. Now note how we can use double quotes or single quotes inside the square brackets. So carrying that analogy on, how do we actually create these? Well, you can just write a line down. You could go favTV Dan equals West Ring, and that PHP will process that and go, oh yes, this is an instruction to create an associative array because it doesn't already exist, and it will just create that array with the name favTV, with that label and with that content. And we could carry on adding items just like that. If you know all the values in advance, then you can use the array reserve word. Now this is a little bit different to what we had before because you have to supply both the label and the contents that are going to go into that cell. So here we kind of go Dan West Wing, and what we do is we use a sort of an equals and a greater than symbol to sort of suggest it's like an arrow. So Dan, arrow, West Wing, Barry, arrow, Mad Men, like that. And that will actually create our associative array. Now there are a whole bunch of different functions available for associative arrays. Probably the most interesting one here is count. Now the reason that's important, of course, is how do you actually process an array? Well, when we did arrays, we also talked about loops. So here's an example of an array with colours in, and what we're going to do is we're going to parse that array structure by using a loop. And we simply have an index, I, and what we do is we increment I over and over again, and every time we test for I until there are no values left. But the important point here is we have to have a variable, we have to have a function called count, and what count does is it tests to see how many cells there actually are. Have we processed all the cells? So we need an equivalent structure, something that looks like that, for associative arrays, and PHP provides us with this function that's called, this reserved word called for each. So this is a loop which works specifically for associative arrays. And you have to lay it out like this. So you go for each, and then we have something in brackets. And what we do is we say the name of the associative array, well in this instance it's Fave TV, and we go as, and then we come up with the names, a name for the label and a name for the contents of the cell indicated by that label. So here, for example, I'm making up two names, person and program. Now you can use whatever names you like there, but what you do is you use that little arrow notation between them. So this piece of code will run, and what it will do is, as we progress through the structure, person and program will take on the names, the values of the label and the contents of the box. So the first thing would happen, we get Dan likes West Wing, then we'd get Barry likes Mad Men, then Phil likes Horizon. Person and program would have their values changed as we processed our way through the associative array. Now that notation, that associative array notation, may seem familiar, and the reason it's familiar because you've actually been using it already, and we've used it in forms because the get and the post array that are created when we do a form are actually associative arrays. So for example, if we were using get in our form, what PHP does is it automatically creates an associative array with the special name underscore get in capital letters, and it creates that pairing. So every element on the form, it pulls the name out, like for example here, soap name, times a week, comments and continue. Those are elements on the form, and it's putting the values from the form into those particular boxes. So when we use get and post at the top of a program, at the top of a response page, what we're actually doing is we're using the get and the post associative array. So this is the get one. If we made a slight change to the form and we made it post instead, we would have the post associative array. So it works in exactly the same way. Each of the cells that we have here comes from the form, and it's going to be the name of the element on the form and then the contents of that form inside each of the sub cells. So post and get are actually examples of an associative array that are automatically created for us.